Well, we've heard the state of the union and the state of our state, but let's get more specific and more regional. What is the state of education in the St. Louis area? Tonight we'll hear from educators in the classroom, Missouri's top education official, and more. And it's not all bad news. We even have a little breaking news. So stay tuned. And on Stay Tuned, you drive the discussion. We bring local experts, journalists, and civic leaders together to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Tweet us your insights on tonight's topic, and you've got a seat at the table. With a few national experts and a panel of community members, this is the show bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. So stay tuned. Well, she's been on the show before, and we're glad to have her back, but never in this role. This is the new commissioner of the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, Margie Van Dieven. Thank you for being here. Thanks for coming back, and especially in the capacity you are in now. And I said we had a little breaking news, so just real quickly, it just broke right before the show that Ty McNichols, the superintendent of the Normandy School District, and we've all followed the issues in Normandy with unaccreditation, potential for bankruptcy again this year. Ty stepping down, should we read anything into that?
No, I would just like to thank Dr. McNichols for his service to the Normandy Schools Collaborative, and to help people understand that the State Board of Education voted in December to grant all authority back to the Joint Executive Governing Board on personnel decisions, such as what they're doing with moving Dr. Pearson into the interim superintendency, and just rest assured, I have every bit of confidence. Dr. Pearson has demonstrated exceptional education. He's an exceptional educator, he's an exceptional leader, and just a true passion for doing what's right for kids, high expectations all the way. So I think they're in really good hands right now.
Well, and on that note, then let's step back just a little bit and give us more of a 30,000-foot view. What is the state of education in the St. Louis region?
You know, St. Louis region is probably as diverse as the state. There's a lot of great things happening in the St. Louis region in education, a lot of things that need to be celebrated. There's areas that we need improvement, and we're working to make it better for all kids.
So, okay, what are those issues? What are the biggest challenges that you face when you're looking at the St. Louis area when we're talking about schools like Normandy?
Well, right now for Normandy, I think the biggest issue that we're really focusing on right now is how to resolve the transfer situation. Again, all kids deserve access to high quality education, and there's two things that when we're talking about all kids, we have to remember: all kids in the Normandy Schools district, and all kids to where the receiving districts are, wherever they're going. And so really getting a handle on how to look at tuition, look at what is an appropriate tuition cost. We certainly don't, there are a number of children who want to stay in the Normandy Schools Collaborative, and we've heard from parents, we need to have quality schools in our community. How do we make that happen? While children have the ability to transfer, we also want to make sure that what's happening back at home it's on the constant improvement level. Also on the receiving end, we've heard from districts there that say, you know, we want to welcome kids into the district, but we also want to make sure that we're not negatively impacting what's in place for the kids that are already in the district. So things like class size needs to be taken into account.
I'm wondering what your priorities are now that you're in the top job. You were a teacher yourself for
Yes.
15 years,
15
you told
years,
me,
right?
Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so how about this? When you were a teacher, what did you want from DESE that now you might be able to do?
That's a great, you know, I have to say, when I was a teacher, I didn't really know what DESE did.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably still true for a lot of teachers. They don't realize, you know, the impact of what happens at the state and how that goes into the classroom. We're working to better communicate with teachers and help them see exactly what we do and how we can impact what happens in the classroom, but really it's up to the teachers that impact the lives of the children every day. So as the Commissioner of Education right now, we are very focused on implementing the 3 goals of the Top 10 by 20 plan. The first being that all kids will graduate college and career ready. And I just need to continue to emphasize the all and the and there. All kids means all kids, and that becomes very challenging, but it's critically important, and we're very serious about that. And then the and, college and career ready. Again, doesn't mean that every child will go to college, but it does mean that we believe that all kids need to be prepared to enter either, have options, either enter college or career ready, equipped with the skills they need to be immediately successful in a career that they would choose in the career pathway. The second is that all children need to be have the opportunity to enter school ready to learn. So we're really focusing on early learning opportunities. Again, research will show, experience will show that children who come to school ready to learn have a much greater chance for success. And then third, an effective teacher in every classroom, an effective leader in every school. If you're looking at any school level factor, again, it's the teacher.
So are there things that your department can't do that or maybe aren't your responsibility that you feel like need to be a focus of everyone that's concerned about education?
Absolutely, and we talk quite a bit about some of the soft skills. We talk at the department. We can talk about academic success, very important. But last week at the board meeting, for example, we heard from the CAPS program, which is a program that really focuses on internships. We looked at Pathways to Prosperity, which talks about bringing the workforce into the classroom, students into the workforce. How do we make that relationship work, make education meaningful for kids? And one of the things that they talk about are soft skills, perseverance, critical thinking skills, attendance rates, those types of things that are really in the hands of the local school district. Climate and culture in your schools, that's something we can't really manage at the state level, but we can certainly help understand the importance of those other skills.
I want to bring a couple more voices into this conversation. I know you have obligations tonight, so we appreciate you making time for us, but I think you can stick around for one more conversation. But we also want to hear from you. We have a couple of hashtags tonight. Stay tuned, STL, hashtag stay tuned STL, and also this is part of our work with the American Graduate, so hashtag AmGrad, STL. Find us there, and we want to hear what you have to say. Let's take a look at what you're already saying, and on the other side of that, we'll introduce you to an American Graduate champion.
It takes a certain kind of person to be a cop. It takes a certain kind of cop to be a school resource officer.
They're pretty cool, real open to us, very inviting, open arms.
St. Louis County Officer William Munson is at Hazelwood Central High School. His job goes far beyond safety and security.
He tells me when I'm messing up, and that's a good thing because it means he cares about me.
But being able to pull that student in my office or in the hallway and deal with that critical issue they're dealing with and coming to some type of resolution, it's satisfying.
He admits that he first took this job partly because of the regular hours, but it grew up.
When I had a couple of students say, Officer Munson, thank you for what you did because of what you told me how to go about something. Here's my end results. And that was huge.
To learn more about and to recognize American Graduate champions or to become one yourself, go to 9net.org/AmericanGraduate.
All right, our thanks to Officer Munson, and our thanks to two principals who are joining the conversation here. Dr. Beth Bender, principal at Gateway STEM High School, and Dale Bergdorf, principal at Jennings High School. Back with us still, Margie Van Dieven. Okay, so I have you all at the table here. What do principals need from DESE?
It's really hard to say. I think about that, but we don't spend much time, as she alluded to before, thinking about DESE. We're so entrenched in our work that it's hard to say we need DESE to do this. we have to take care of business ourselves. And that's one of the things that good principals know, is that we have to take care of business. They do what they do. We hope for great communication, clear expectations, understanding of our challenges. But as to sitting around wishing things, it's not where we spend our time in most cases.
Pretty much just hope for support as well, with continuing to work with universities for training programs for teachers, continue to look for new ways to train teachers, new avenues to gain assistant principals and those individuals as well. But again, you know, as Dr. Bender said, we don't sit around and think about that kind of stuff. We concentrate on what we can handle within our own buildings. You know, it's great that we have conversations and they allow us time to meet as principals and you know, be part of those conversations. But I think just the support mainly is just there.
You said taking care of business. You are taking care of some business in the Ginny's school district. Brag on yourself for a second, because this you're teetering on the unaccreditation line there for a while, but the scores have turned around. What gives? How did you pull it off? How are you continuing to pull it off?
Remember, it's not just me, Casey. It's a lot of folks. We have lots of new folks, but we have also lots of folks who have just said, you know what, all kids can learn, and this is what we're going to do to make that happen. We take a very strong look at our data. We spend a lot of time on data, but at the same time we spend a lot of time on what do our kids need. You know, we have washers and dryers in every building. Parents can come wash clothes, so students are not out of school for uniforms. This spring, the high school will have the spot will be a clinic. They're on campus, so that eventually, as that program rolls out, kids don't have to lose school time to be seen, or to get medical needs met, or just to get some counseling. You know, we partner with Youth in Need to make sure that social workers are in place. All of our students are getting wraparound services. Everybody has their needs met, and then education becomes that other thing you do when you're there. Working really hard on attendance and making sure that students at Jennings understand you're going to come to school first, because that leads to bigger and better things. You know, we take a very strong approach. We look at our curriculum in the elementaries and middle schools. The curriculum is 1 year ahead. High school, we are really concentrating on what are our kids missing, and how do we as educators fill those gaps, and how do we push for that career-ready person who's going to leave our building ready to do whatever, whether it's college, whether it's military, or whether it's the career path. Are they ready, and are they ready in each area? So that's really what we're concentrating on, and we are really finding big gains.
You, from around the, just to brag on you a little bit for yourself, it was around the 50% area. Now it's closer to 79, 80% when the states are scoring your schools.
It is.
Okay, real quickly, I'll take a pause in this conversation just because you mentioned the educators. I want to introduce everyone to a teacher by the name of Ms. Spencer.
Miss Spencer was my 5th grade teacher, and everybody either knew her as mom or grandma. She was very, very loving. She was serious about learning, and you knew that as soon as you hit the door on the first day of school. She is one of those urban teachers that really, I guess, kind of went outside of the curriculum to teach us things. She broke some of the school rules in order to not just teach her students the reading, writing, arithmetics, and the basics, but she went outside of the curriculum to teach us other things.
Who is it?
It's me.
Oh, hi, me.
You have something about you that people just respect, whether they're bad people, good people,
Can I say
quote
this
unquote. You can say it.
Okay, I have a good right foot. It's a wonderful feeling. It is. And to care about them. That I guess out of that they knew that I cared about them sincerely.
I think having a teacher like that is really good for students who are deemed at risk, because they bring not only just the sternness that you may not get at home, which most people would consider tough love, but they bring you a sense of pride to yourself. They bring you a lot of what you don't, as an at-risk student, have at home. You may not have mom there to hug you at night. She may be at work working at 2 jobs, or, you know, some parents of at-risk children may be on drugs. So to have a teacher like that and to know that somebody loves you really would make you push harder to do well in life.
You know, we've heard, you can feel a little kumbaya sometimes when we talk about relationships and what they mean, but boy, I think you saw it right there. Is that teachable to your staff, or can you replicate that?
I don't think you can replicate the exact thing. Every teacher has to find their own kind of mojo, but you can definitely model that, and you can have those conversations about, you know, where our students are. You know, this is really, especially in this day and age, this past semester, with everything that went on in the St. Louis community, more than ever, we realized that we had to step outside of the box of just being an educator. When our kids came this school year, I asked the staff, I said, we're in tough times. When the kids come in, I need us to be kinder and more gentler, better listeners than we've ever been. And as I talked to my teachers early on in the year, what I was hearing back was, the kids are a lot nicer this year. We're just seeing more politeness. And what we realized is we set that tone. And that's really important. And those kind of teachers I have like that at Gateway are amazing. And they do change lives. And if you can get a student like that, then you can get to the math and the chemistry and the statistics. But that connection is really crucial to have the optimum learning.
She also said, go ahead.
I was going to just echo her sentiments. You can't, we call it when you're looking for teachers. You can't teach it, it is there.
You want a good educator in every classroom, you said. Is there a way at the state level that you're trying to do some of what we're talking about here to bring us more teachers like that?
Well, the first place to look would be in our educator preparation program, where we're focusing now not only on the content tests, but also looking at the performance of the teacher in the classroom. How do they interact with students? How do they react to the questions? How do they follow up? So yes, I do believe that it takes both. You have to know the content, you have to be able to build the relationships. Those two work together. Sometimes, most of the time, the relationship comes first, as you said, and then the content follows. But you can't be a really highly effective teacher if you don't have both. And so, yes.
You mentioned data. We hear that from thinking like presidential election to the prosecutor's office. How is education using data? Because that's something that you can wrap your hands around for us.
In the old days, you know, when I was a student, we took tests. The teachers marked it in the book, and we kind of moved on. Now there is a lot more reflection on the work. You're charting what your students have learned. Have they mastered these concepts? Where are they at related to standards? So we are charting all of their academic growth. We chart related to post-secondary preparation. Where is this student as far as if they're free and reduced lunch? Are they an undocumented student? And we chart all that so we know how best to serve them. So we've become very, very data saturated in education.
And the tests, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's some changes we're having this year when it comes to Common Core, something that a lot of people are very passionate about, but in terms of the Common Core standards will now be reflected in the testing somehow, so we might see some different results there?
Yes, we're having lots of conversations about that. The tests that will be administered in the spring are around the new revised standards, and it's a total different format for students. They'll be taking them online. It's a completely different system. So
a different set of test-taking skills.
Yes. So even though kids are very accustomed, I believe, today in using the mouse and knowing how to click and save and move things, it's just a different format. No more paper and pencil. So we'll see some different results, and we'll use the data to analyze what that's telling us about.
Are administrators worried about how this might negatively reflect
Yes.
what it might mean?
Of course we are.
Yeah.
Of course we are.
We spend a lot of time concerned about the tests and how it reflects on our school and how it reflects on our students. And while you have that burden, you also know that it kind of pushes us. I think it pushes us to be better in some ways, but it is a stress that, 20 years ago, nothing like the pressure related to scores and exists that it does today. I mean, it's a different game than when I first got into education, I'm sure, is when you
It's very different from when I was in education. But I think there's, a lot of value in looking at understand, people want to know, people want to understand how are the schools doing. It's not just the teacher anymore that's paying, or even just one individual parent. They want to know how's my school doing, how's the district doing, how are we doing. We want to know how are we doing as a state. So there's some value. Yes, there's some climate and culture that we need to look at around testing, and how do we make it very, very meaningful. If we're collecting data and just collecting data, that's of no use to anyone. We're really using the data, and we have to reflect upon how what happened today and what we're looking at today impacts tomorrow. And teaching kids to do it too. I mean, I think that's the change that I've seen the most. Is teaching. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. That's one of the things that we're doing too, is having students track their own data. You know, making sure they understand and they take buy-in into where our accreditation falls. You know, we've challenged all the teachers at Jennings High this semester that they're all going to have students in their classrooms track their data. We've had teachers doing it in small pockets and seeing great results out of it. It becomes a competition. We're all competitive, no matter what grade you're in or where you are. So we're data saturated, but I do think a lot of it is good data. You know, if my students at Jennings High don't score well on the ACT, it affects which colleges they can go to. That's part of my job as the leader of that building, is to make sure that their scores get them anywhere they want to go. And that's something to be said in the community.
And I guess if I could just quickly add, when we're talking about data to the general public who might be watching this tonight, we're not talking about just getting numbers back. What we're looking at, and I heard Tiffany Anderson present to our board last week, who beautifully went through how you look at the individual strand of what kids know and are able to do. So you understand, okay, this child can add up to 3-digit numbers, and this whole group here is not quite reaching that. So what's happening? So it's really not looking at, I want to be clear, it's not, when we talk about data, we're not just talking about a number. We're talking about instructional practice and what do we need to...
What they've mastered,
yes,
what they
right,
haven't mastered. If they have achieved certain standards, then we know we can move on, instead of in the old days, you just moved on. So I think it makes us much more reflective.
Unfortunately, we have to move on.
Okay, very good.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your time. We appreciate you being here. Dr. Anderson, you're referencing there as the superintendent of Jennings. All right, thank you very much. And it's not just folks like this having these conversations. There are concerned members of the community and even students talking a lot about education. The Ferguson Commission met just the other night. The topic was education. Here's a sampling of what some of the folks in the crowd had to say.
This commission is a result of those protesters. And yes, if we fix the police issue and the municipal court issue, we will improve lives. But if we get these two issues fixed, education and preserving and developing healthy, intact families, these are the game changers that make generations do better. And if somehow or another this commission can energize hundreds of people on the street demanding better schools, better teachers, more funding, making grades not babies, waiting to form your families to when you're ready. These are the things that pull people out of poverty, keep people out of the street, get them employed, and make a better society. Solve the police problem, certainly. Solve the municipal court problem. But the poor will still be with us if they're not educated and if they don't come from healthy families. Thank you.
I want to be able to teach. I don't want to play politics. Children don't understand that. They're at school to learn, and I want to be a part of that. And I wish that someone would listen and take politics out of these schools and start placing these children first. Thank you.
These kids who are going through it, they need to know how to read and write like nobody's business. We don't have time, like the lady said, for the politics. We don't have time to wait for people to get schools together that's been failing for 20 or 30 years. These kids need education right now.
Is there something that we can do? Is there a program that we have that would distribute equally the amount of experience as well as the education level of the teachers that are teaching our high school and middle school students?
I attended Hazelwood Public Schools my entire life before attending Lutheran High School North, and I know by firsthand experience that our schooling systems offer two different worlds with two different environments. At times, our schools have allowed me to believe in the education system, and at times, the majority of times, our schools stimulate my alarming distrust with the education system. I strongly believe that our current education system has become a ladder to systematic poverty. I believe schools should emphasize on the individual rather than standardized testing. Innovative education reform is the #1 issue I'm out there protesting for, and I believe Teach for America is a leading agent in that. Teach for America saved my life. If it weren't for teachers in the program who taught me to believe in myself and seek social justice for my community, I wouldn't be where I am today. We don't need any more clock in, clock out teachers. We need more programs like Teach for America. And I hope the Missouri legislature gets its act together and passes significant education bills, because the youth is ready, the youth is energized, and the youth is prepared to vote out anyone who obstructs educational justice. I guess to have equal education opportunities means to the beginning of prosperity for all, and I guess that's why politics rejects it. I challenge our leaders to create policies that end the vicious school-to-prison pipeline. I challenge them to stop cutting funds for early and secondary childhood education, create policies that build social equity and equality, touch lives, inspire our young, teach our young men and women to be free and make a difference. The movement lives. Clifton Kinney.
You see a lot of passion at those meetings, and not just from the adults. You see some bright young minds that are very passionate and engaged about when it comes to their own education. We are replacing the Commissioner of Education at this table only, I should clarify, with Doug Thaman, the Executive Director of Missouri Charter Public School Administration. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
First of all, and our two principals are still with us. And sometimes there's a little tension between public schools and charter schools. What's your take on the situation of education in the St. Louis area?
Well, I think, when you look at what you just saw, I think what you heard was people saying, we need options, and those options need to exist, and we don't just need schools for the sake of having schools, we need good options. And it's fantastic that there are students who have the benefits of Jennings High School and Gateway STEM, but there are a lot of students who don't have those options. And so that's the role with charters. It's not a silver bullet. It's not meant to replace districts. It's meant to say, let's make sure there are good options. And so what a great situation if I, as a parent, can say, I'm going to be able to choose between sending my child to Jennings High School or sending my child to a charter high school, and they're both performing and doing really well. That's when we know that education has really turned the corner, when families have more good options and they're not just choosing one because the rest aren't meeting the needs of their child.
And not to go off on a whole charter school episode here, but just as a little clarification, can anyone choose the charter schools in the St. Louis area? Because a lot of times you hear pushback. There's a selection bias that charter schools don't have to take everyone. Do you have to take everyone?
You do not. You have to take everyone, but charter schools have they are open enrollment schools, and they are public schools. And charter schools, in their application, in their charter, they are able to establish their class sizes and the size of that school. If more students are seeking seats in that school than there are seats available, there's a lottery for that. But there's no entry criteria, there's no testing criteria. It is open enrollment. The objective is that you're establishing a model of a school, typically smaller schools, that really allow your administration and your teachers to really develop relationships with those families. You were just talking about the importance of those relationships. And great instruction happens, I agree, when you have those relationships with kids.
Okay, so thank you for the clarification. Let's back it out just a little bit to what a charter school in the St. Louis area and other public schools might face. Are there different challenges? I believe the answer is yes. Being a city school in a highly populated area, in the core of our urban area here, are there challenges you face there that they might not see in rural areas where they might have sway in, say, the state legislature?
Certainly. When we look at just all the societal issues, the poverty levels, when you look at the violence, all of those things are factors for our students. We know that trauma and things like that really have a huge impact on a student's learning. So when I have a student who has had a house fire or has witnessed a murder or has had violence in the home, that directly impacts their education. And what that relates to then for us is what Ms. Bergdorf was talking about, which is that we have to really give much more wraparound services. We are not just schools nowadays where you come and you learn the subjects. We see to social needs, we see to family needs. We really try to take care of the whole child because that's the only way to get them educated.
Well, you washers and dryers, you said.
Washers and dryers, warming centers on cold days when we don't have school because we don't have buses. But the schools are still open because students still have to eat. And we are very aware in Jennings that a lot of our students, the only time that they get at least 2 full meals for the day is days that school's in session. So we've opened a food pantry for our community over the last 2 years. It's grown in leaps and bounds every month that it's opened. So it is very wraparound. I want to go back to charters just a second. We push each other. Dr. Bender and I, we talk about scores. When we see each other as principals, it's a different conversation now as a high school principal than it was a few years ago. So even with charter schools, it's still I'm still competitive, but it's still, I think our teachers and our administrators need to hear that. That when parents have a choice, what am I going to do at my high school to make sure my parents don't want to choose anywhere else? They do have Lutheran North. It's right up the street from Jennings. What do I do so that my parents don't choose Lutheran North? It is things like make sure that my ACT scores are growing, make sure that I have college access classes so that my kids can get the same avenues that other students can get, so that they don't choose anywhere else. They come right to their home school.
We heard the student putting the lawmakers on the spot there. Are you confident that or can solutions come from Jefferson City for public or charter schools? Are there needs that they can meet?
I think what could come from Jefferson City, and this is a year that even with session only being in its 3rd week, where the discussion around education is a daily thing, which is great. What can come from Jefferson City is establishing the parameters, placing the boundaries. You can't legislate relationships, you can't legislate climate, but you can set those parameters, you can set those boundaries, you can make sure those options, the opportunity to have options and choice are available. And from there, then it moves to the schools and the educators who really are on the front line every day, regardless of whether it's a charter school, a district school, a private school. It really doesn't matter what type. Those are the folks on the front line really that are developing those relationships and working with those kids.
Confident in Jefferson City?
I'm always optimistic, yes. I think we're getting a better idea of what schools need than we used to. I think people are becoming more vocal. I think politicians are understanding our needs better. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Okay, let's also see what people are saying. There's always an online conversation that sometimes is entirely different than what we're talking about here. So let's check out what you're saying on social media.
Because I love children, yes. I try not to miss a day if I can help it. I love you all.
For more than 20 years, Elizabeth Schumpert has been on the corner of Forsyth and Asbury in University City, every morning and every afternoon during the school year.
It's a wonderful start to their day. Every morning, Elizabeth greets them with a smile. She cares for them. She knows most of them by name.
Come on, baby.
Today is Elizabeth's 75th birthday, and the children she protects on their way to and from school care for her too.
Happy birthday, and thanks for all you do for us.
And I thank you all for doing so much for me, too. I don't care how cold it is, I still try to be here for you all.
Okay, let me introduce you to our next table. We have with us, welcome to the show, Bill Douthit, Education Equity LLC, James Schulz, Assistant Professor of Education Leadership and Policy Studies at UMSL, and also still with a fellow with the Show Me Institute.
That's right.
And Mike Jones, Vice President, Missouri State School Board of Education. Okay, so can we just pick up for a second on what we were just talking about with Jefferson City? Are the three of you looking to Jefferson City for something tangible this session when it comes to education?
From my perspective, Jefferson City would do best to get out of the way, right? So too often what Jefferson City tries to do is mandate solutions, and they try to dictate what should be done, when we really need to leave room for the educators on the ground to come up with policy solutions and solutions locally. And so ideally, I'd love to see them, as Doug Thaman said, give more options to students, expand choice for students, and allow students to choose and allow schools to really be innovative.
Is that what we really, is that what we need?
Well,
do we need some guidance and some help?
I think you need guidance and help. I think the system in America is that states are have primary responsibility for education. The General Assembly is where we ultimately make overarching policy relative to budget and direction. So the General Assembly does have a role in maintaining the system of public schools. In this current political environment in our country, not just our state, it's very difficult to come up with comprehensive solutions to fairly intractable problems, and so they don't do a very good job at it, but that it is their responsibility, and I would argue just the reverse. They shouldn't get out of the way. They should kind of step up and get it right.
Step one would be full funding of the foundation formula to provide the supports that school districts need in terms of financial funding to address the school-to-prison pipeline.
We hear, before you go, we hear that a lot about how we are not fully funding. Break that down for us in layman's terms, because we hear that a lot, that we've got a certain benchmark, but we just don't even do it. What gives?
In terms of, well, let's look at St. Louis County, St. Louis City. The difference, St. Louis County taxpayers fund both a special school district and their local districts. St. Louis Public provides both. An apples-to-apples comparison would show that the per-pupil reimbursement rate, comparing the two, that St. Louis Public provides substantially more services for the amount of dollars received. As to the funding necessary, all the data shows that students who live in areas with a high incidence of poverty, who have educational learning deficits, need more learning supports. Part of the purpose of federal funding is to supplement state funds, not to supplant. And
Yeah.
the issue
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, the issue then becomes, what is Missouri's commitment? Are we more prone to educate or incarcerate? Because if you don't provide people an education to be able to take care of themselves, to earn a living wage, then people will find other means to survive, which generates and replicates the past where incarceration seems to impact a large number of our population.
Just to put the funding formula in context, I think the last time the legislature effectively addressed this was someplace in the mid to late 90s. But basically, there is a formula, fairly complicated one, is done in the back room someplace, and you really got to be you have to know some kind of dark magic in order to understand how the formula actually works. But
or you can read the primer that I wrote.
Yeah, okay. But it basically says the legislature saying that this is what is equitable funding for Missouri schools. Okay, and this is the formula, and this would do it, and that's a number. And then there's the appropriation process where on an annual basis they actually appropriate money for these state activities. And historically, there's just a tremendous gap between what the formula that the legislature says schools need to be adequately funded and what they actually appropriate. So that gap that you're looking at, and right now it's in the neighborhood of about $450 million. So there is a $400 million plus gap between what the legislature says schools in Missouri need versus what it actually funds. So your discussion is really around what they project is necessary and required versus what they actually do.
Let's hear what they had to say. Last week on Stay Tuned, we had 2 state senators talking about education. Let's hear what they had to say. Real quick, not to go the whole time on education, but you okay with a little public money going to a private school?
Actually, that was my proposal. The language that I put in is that public money could go to a non-religious institution. The way that I wrote that piece of legislation is that you had to go through several different tiers. So one, you could not transfer to a school unless you had a intra-district transfer opportunity first. And so that's what we wanted to do, is to limit the ability of students to leave so that we would not take away more money from the sending district. Normandy, as you know, if they had more students that left than did, they would be totally bankrupt. And that's what we were facing last year, and that's what we still can face. So right now, we've been in some negotiations. They've been very fruitful. This time around, we have the governor who is participating in these conversations. And I think he understands we're going to move forward with or without him.
People need to be able to feel like no matter what zip code they live in, okay, that they're going to be able to get a quality education and have an opportunity. That's how both of us got to where, everybody, the path, the truest path and the great equalizer is education. And we have to make sure that everybody in our community has access to that, and they don't right now.
So James, that's a Republican saying education is the great equalizer. I want to go back to just what you said a little bit earlier, where you think that Jefferson City needs to get out of the way. And then how do you square that with what the young man at the podium said earlier, that there are different education standards, there are different levels of education quality for different zip codes, just like we heard from last week.
Right.
Have we not entrusted our tax money to Jefferson City for what we call public education, or is it not truly public?
Well, right now what we call public education is a system of schools. And really what public education is it's an idea. It's an idea that everyone deserves to have access to a quality education. And so I think that's what private school choice can do. It can open the doors for more students to have access to even more schools. And so if we shift our mindset from thinking of public education as just being a system of schools that we have to regulate, we have to test, we have to evaluate and see how they're doing, to thinking more along the lines that public education is the idea that every kid deserves to have access to a great school, then I think allowing students to attend a private school is just a no-brainer.
I would agree with that as a philosophical concept, that public education is an idea. In the 19th century, early 20th century, mid-20th century, we delivered that idea in one format. Obviously, as we move into the 21st century, we're going to have to figure out a different delivery mechanism. So there's a range of options for that. I do think, though, that inside of whatever delivery system you use, there has to be some standards and accountability so that however you're meeting those students' needs, you can ensure that it actually happens at a standard that people find acceptable and the child gets the education that they require and that they deserve. So I think we get caught up in a debate between narrow options that ought to really be thought of as more broader strategic opportunities to get it done one way or the other. I don't think it's any problem funding private schools as long as they have the same public accountability that public schools have. So whatever that standard we're going to use to ensure that we are delivering it in this system, I would argue that you have to have those standards apply to a different delivery system. And if you got that, you still have a system of public education, publicly funded education that reaches every child in a manner most effective to the child, but also ensures a standard of consistency and excellence across the board.
And certainly that's a good aspirational goal. However, the starting point would be the Missouri Constitution, looking at Article 9 that mandates that there be a free public education funded by the legislature. Now, certainly there'll be debates as to what that means and whether or not public funds can be diverted for private use. The next step, if those funds were diverted, would be the potential of the segregative effect in terms of the use of those monies, because vouchers raise a specter that we've seen nationally in terms of being used for the purposes of further dividing black and white, rich and poor students in terms of secluded areas. So as Mike was mentioning, accountability and having some force where there's equal access that's involved with any consideration.
If I could weigh in 2 points, I think it's important as we understand St. Louis history, school boundaries were a way of reinforcing segregation.
Right.
So that's also one point that we need to consider. But there's another option out there for us that we could consider. Tax credit scholarships. We have a bill right now called Equal Opportunity Scholarships, which the outcome is the same. It provides scholarships for students to attend private schools, but it does it through private donations, through tax credits where we get people to give money to scholarship organizations. So the outcome's the same, but the money doesn't come through the legislature. It's not a voucher. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that the dollars aren't public dollars because they never flow into the government treasury. And so there are other ways to think about this. If we want to provide students with options, there are other ways that we can do it.
Let me hold it there for 1 second. Keep the energy. Don't. But we got to go check on social media. We want to hear what you're saying. We also want to get everyone back at the table. We'll be right back. So we were kind of getting close to this question here, and I want to ask everyone to weigh in on this, that it's just a very, maybe on a philosophical level, how can we, or how close or how far are we from education being the same for 2 different zip codes? Right here in the St. Louis region, you can be just a couple of digits off and have very different, speaking of data, your outcomes are very different, or likely to be very different.
We're not even close, and we give ourselves way too much credit for trying. Okay, and the reality that depending upon an accidental birth or where you happen to live, we have huge disparities in the delivery of basically a public infrastructure, because that's what education is part of the infrastructure of a society, and everybody's entitled to it. And I'd almost argue that I would love to see somebody file a 14th Amendment case in the Supreme Court about the inequities relative to how, I think they've done it before and lost, but the reality is if children are citizens of the United States, and they are, then they have an equal protection right under the 14th Amendment. And so the fact that we inequitably fund education based on the randomness of geography and ethnicity fundamentally undermines their rights as United States citizens, as far as I was concerned.
And I think some would argue hinders our overall economy. This isn't just some may look at this as a moral question or the right thing to do, but you can also be fairly pragmatic about this. I think it's we've talked on the show before. It's not good for the rest of the region if one area is suffering.
Yeah, I'd like to just speak to that. And our problem, the reason we don't do it is because we don't see education for children as a moral imperative. When you get into the economic benefit or the societal benefit, that's a policy question. And you got options on policy. You can do it one way or you can do it another. You don't have options when things are, or you're confronted with moral imperatives. You either do them or you don't do it. And once we make education, again, a moral imperative, then we're going to be required as adults in a society to live up to that responsibility. So I think you do, that the problem is with framing it in non-moral terms. And we have that moral responsibility to children, and we're failing to meet it for a lot of children, not all children, but for way too many children every day.
As long as you continue to draw boundaries around schools, we will never solve this problem. We're going to be spinning our wheels. Because here's what happens. Some schools do great. They start improving. And then what happens? People start moving into there. They raise property values, and the poor people have to move someplace else because the property values have gone up, and they move into other districts. This is what happens. People move into better districts, and some other district then has a surplus of low achieving disadvantaged students who come from poor families, and then the people there move out because that district's not doing well, and they move into the other districts that start performing better. So as long as you continue to draw circles around schools and say you have to go here because you live here, we're going to have the same problems.
There's not a value in their being tied to their communities and their neighborhoods and kind of being geographically committed to one area?
Depending upon your perspective, if we look back historically to 1982, when the Liddell plaintiffs and the Caldwell NAACP plaintiffs in the school desegregation case filed their motion for unitary status, had Judge Hungate at that time determined that the plaintiffs were able to meet their burden of persuasion, there would have been a single district from the Mississippi to the Missouri River. There would have been no St. Louis Public, no Parkway, no Rockwood. There would be the metropolitan St. Louis district. Resources would be unified. Teachers, based upon the plan submitted, would have been transferred based on the need, where unlike in medicine, where you use triage, where your most skilled professionals go to those who need the services immediately and the most, master teachers would have gone to the areas of highest need.
And I think it also depends on, how do you define community? Families have a lot of different types of communities. There's their faith-based community. It doesn't mean that their church has to be one block away. It could be that the church that they've selected is in a different part of St. Louis. They have school communities. They have their local neighborhood community. There are a lot of ways to establish community in a school that gives you a sense of belongingness. And so there's their value in community, absolutely, but it doesn't mean there's value in saying you are locked in because of your zip code to only being able to attend these schools.
Is this something that you think about often, or do you not have time to even go to the theoretical level of, or do you worry about your boundary going away, or do you think it's a good thing, or again, is it something that you've got so much else on your plate?
For me and for many of my colleagues, it's not a regular worry. We're entrenched in the work. We are doing the work while everyone else is theorizing. Mm-hmm. I will say that we as a region, we've seen it with what has happened in Normandy and Riverview. We've started to realize our neighbors matter and their success matters. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to find a way for our community to realize that Clayton needs to care about St. Louis needs to care about University City, Pattonville needs to care about Hazelwood. We need to realize that we all go up together or we all go down together. The boundaries are there, but they also aren't there, and we've seen that. What is good for the region is good for the region. What's bad for the region, even if it's part, it hurts us all. It hurts our economy, it hurts the businesses that will come here. All of that ties to education.
And it's a moral imperative, or should be?
It should be. And I also want to go back to what James was saying. I think, to be honest with you, if we spend a lot more time training our teachers and putting our money in them, and their training and the wraparound services that one individual can, and the relationships that one individual can build, I think it's not going to matter where that school is located or what socioeconomic status that student comes from. Their success will be the same. And I think, it might be a dream world that I live in, but I do believe that. I think that relationships play that large of a role in our educational society. And I think that as long as we continue to hire teachers, and we're trying our best to do that at Jennings, is hire teachers that will give you 125% all the time, and don't take no for an answer that a kid says, well, I just can't do that. No, that's not. We're going to find a way for you to do that. I think that is going to carry us all the way and continue to raise our schools and continue to raise our communities.
And the leadership to support those teachers.
Absolutely.
And certainly, Casey, it's not just the metropolitan, urban, suburban area. We have to look to rural Missouri. Every child in the state deserves the same high quality 21st century education to be able to compete in the global economy. It's been said before, it needs to be said again. Any Missouri child should expect the highest quality of education.
You know, and I don't have a theory of how you fix this, but there's a proverb, I believe, that says you can't put new wine in old skins. And part of our challenge is, again, we live in a 21st century world, and we have a 19th century education delivery system. Now, something's got to give.
When you put that new wine in an old skin, it breaks.
It breaks, okay, and that's what I mean. And we have tendency to be very narrow and lack the ability to think in new paradigms. So we've had a major paradigm shift in the world and in this country, and we just have not culturally and intellectually caught up with it as a population. So it makes it real difficult and problematic to have serious discussions about what's the best delivery system, what's the values underlying them, because a lot of times the values are the same. You're just tactically arguing different points of view. But we're trying to hang on to things that have outlived their usefulness. And so a large part of things that we do in the public sector should have been put to bed a long time ago. And if we were business, we'd be out of business because you couldn't stay in business with these archaic systems. So I don't know how we make that leap culturally and intellectually, but that's the challenge in fixing the education problem.
Well, okay, we'll talk about this just a little bit more on staytuned.9net.org. For the all of us here at Stay Tuned, thanks to all of you for joining us tonight, and until next time. I'd like to give the people a little something online. I think that might have, I felt like there was a sentiment there. You guys might have, not that you haven't already agreed tonight on the show, but there was a sentiment there.
Well, we probably have major tactical differences, but the point is that conceptually how you need to begin to think and talk about it, and you got to allow for the range of possibilities and see if this strategy is
Principals
consistent.
may not theorize, but I know professors and I know institutes do. Is the moral imperative on the radar?
Oh, absolutely, it's a moral imperative. I mean, that's the reason that I got interested in this is because I'm interested in getting kids a quality education, because I have kids that I want to get a quality education, and I know the benefit that comes from choices. You know, I was a teacher, my wife was a teacher. We had our kids in a school that we didn't feel was meeting our needs, and so we were able to pull them out. My wife was a teacher in the district. We were able to pull them out and pay for a private school. But that's not an option for everyone, and so it's not about public schools, private schools, charter schools. It's about giving kids quality options. And as was just said, you know, how do we do that in a way that kids have access to schools, it's not discriminating against anyone? Those are things that we need to think about and work out, but it's certainly feasible, and I think something we absolutely should do.
And this is why it gets to be tough based on experience, because I'm a lot older than you, and I walked out of the house, went to a school, and the A school I went to was as good as any other school, and I got an extraordinary education in a large public school system that has enabled me to do a ton of things I could not have imagined at 10, 12, or 15, or 18 years old. So what happens is we all gravitate back to what we know and what worked for us. That worked for you, a totally different, you know, I didn't get a chance to choose where I went to school. I got sent to school. And you know, if I stayed narrow about it, I'd argue that if you could just replicate 1960s when there was 100,000 kids in St. Louis public schools, and we all turned out pretty good, but you can't go back to that time. And I don't know how you give choice to everybody. And when you got a country this big, this diverse, and so you still need a system that delivers the product, and that's the hard
On top of the
part.
economics, because certainly the opportunity to have a scholarship for a child to attend a Burroughs, a MICDS, or other options is great, but if there's no transportation associated with that, that becomes a major issue, because attendance I'll leave that to the educators at the table. Isn't that a critical factor? If you don't have time in the seat, or access to the child, the education can't take place. And if you have a family that's dependent upon riding Metro to get back and forth to work, how are they going to transport that young child? Because isn't it the key that you have to learn to read by grade 3 in order to read to learn for every grade thereafter?
So everyone else might be able to leave, go to a better school, and they're stuck with a school that now has fewer resources.
Exactly.
Well, I think part of the problem is too often we're fighting about traditional public schools versus charters, traditional public schools versus private schools. We're fighting about these things. We're not thinking about these issues. If we wanted to start fresh and say, how do we do this? How do we deliver public education in a new way in the 21st century? What would we do? How would transportation look? What would we do there? How would we make sure that every kid has access and every kid has the information to make choices? We could think about those things, but too often we're fighting about whether it's traditional public schools or private schools or charter schools. We should be sector ambivalent. We shouldn't care which it is, and we should start thinking about really these broader solutions. How do we make a new system work?
And that's because too often what we end up doing is fighting about adult decisions, what impacts adults, as opposed to really what is best for kids. And we have to reach a point where we're really looking at this as a moral imperative for children.
And I'll add in that it is about the kids, and the parents are a huge part in that, because a parent that does not engage in the system, a parent that is not proactive about finding other options, that child's left behind. So how does a system, with some kind of new system, come up and address the fact that one of the biggest impediments that students face sometimes is their own family situations?
Let me, and I'll put this in historical context. I went to segregated public schools because neighborhoods were segregated, but I didn't live in a segregated community economically. So when the black community was racially segregated, it was economically very integrated. So doctors and lawyers' children went to school with the janitor and the cab driver's children. So what you had was, and also you had some brilliant black educators who couldn't go do other things, so they all had to teach public school. So all of a sudden, the benefit to me of segregation was I got these extraordinary teachers in an integrated, economically integrated environment. So these middle-class people can make the system work. So if you're a child from a poor family, you are also the beneficiary of an environment, an aspirational environment created by middle-class professionals, and you have then the ability to break generational poverty because you can have a different experience than your family. I would argue that we need to think about it like this. There's things you got to fix in the building. Teachers, building leaders, whatever the pedagogy is, that, whatever that is. That's a technical issue. And then you got kids that come from, I would argue, communities that have lost their structural integrity. Like the way engineers talk about a building. It looks like a building, but it's not safe to go in there because it could collapse. And it's not so much the child coming from a not great home, because children always have, but when they lived in functional communities with schools that work, that's what mitigated it. And I would argue that you could put a kid from an exceptional family that's getting all the intangibles, you can send them to a quality school, but if they got to negotiate a broken community, because the child will spend 3 times more of their working hours in community than they will in school, the likelihood of them being successful is extraordinary. They got to be brilliant or very, very lucky. So we're going to have to find a way as a larger community. I don't think this is the educators' issue. They got to fix the building. But the rest of us have got to add the balance. And think of it as an airplane. It takes 2 wings to fly an airplane. No plane can take off with just 1 wing. If it's got 2 wings, when it takes off, it loses 1, it's going to crash. So you have to fix the school side, whatever that is. And then you have to provide a quality community independent of the status of the specific home. If you can put those 2 things together, I'd argue you've got a chance to maximize the opportunity for any child, no matter who they happen to be.
We'll leave it there,
Well said.
except I will, it's a great place to leave it, and but I'll just add one little thing, and that is that I was at Jennings Junior High today, and the comment was made, a student wants to go into nursing, and she never thought that was possible until it was a field trip that their teachers took her on, and it exposed her to a larger aspiration like you're talking about right there. So thank you all very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching, too.
It's nice to meet you.